Hello everybody, welcome back to this next video on the hidden dimensions of fatedness in your birth chart, having to do with eminence considerations. It's been a while since I've addressed this issue, and that had to do with the pretty damaging experience that when you use all the methods that are presented in ancient astrology regarding this eminence issue, well, then it seems that everybody is eminent, and I show this in certain charts, and so that halted the examination of this issue. So let me first give a sort of a recapitulation of where we are at this moment with this investigation. So let's have a look. So where were we in this investigation of the eminence factors in a natal chart? Now, the reason why I started this investigation had to do with these principles as mentioned by several authors, among them Valens, which is the general idea that when somebody is eminent, then in that case the images and the planets operate differently in such a chart. So, and it almost certainly was indicated that this might harm people around a person who is an eminent person. In that case, that the malefics in such a chart would harm bystanders, innocent bystanders, as sort of a collateral damage, more than it would harm the native, the eminent native, him or herself. So that was the idea of starting this investigation, because I found it a very interesting notion. And of course, we can witness this in everyday life when certain people are eminent. They might harm people around them more than the malefics hurt them, especially in the case of people leading a large group of people or being dictators of and such sort of person. So so this was the idea. The seven wandering stars in the definition of Antiochus is that when Kronos is in its own places, it conducts its business through us, though by assigning an increase for them to the detriment of another. And the interesting thing is that I found an example of this in my in one of my clients' charts. So let's have a look at that. So again, my idea was to try to validate that interesting remark that whenever there are malefics in a native's chart, in an eminent chart of the chart of an eminent person, then that would harm people bystanders, innocent bystanders. Now, this chart is of one of my clients who had as you can see, quite a strong opposition between both Helios and Saturn, Kronos, and of course Venus involved. Aphrodite being also in the 6th place together with Helios, the sun. So, and the reason why this was important, because I was talking about the zodiacal releasing period which had happened and arrived in the image of the goat horn run, Capricorn. So that was of course important, because then Saturn is a chronometer for the entire period. So I was a bit worried about the opposition going on here and a bit weary about it. And but she said something very interesting about that, because of course Venus and Aphrodite and Helios being in the 6th place might involve health matters, health issues. So I was a bit concerned about that for her. But she said something very interesting in her comments on my delineation. She said, I'm far more concerned about my sister and my daughters, indicated of course by Venus, women in general, as this 12-6 axis often acts through those around me. That was of course a very interesting clue, in the sense that this of course has a lot to do with innocent bystanders getting hurt by an opposition in your own chart. So these persons in her life had health issues in the past, so that was interesting. When I then again look at the definition of Antiochus about Kronos, when Kronos is in its own places, which is the case here because Saturn, of course, is in its exaltation in the scales, and thus conducts his business in its chariot, so that's true, and by being set in a good position, which is not the case here because it's in 12th place, it benefits the natives, though by assigning an increase for them to the detriment of another. So it almost seems as if this Saturn is protecting the native but does not protect Venus, the general significator of women, having to do with her the women in the environment of this person. So that was an interesting one. So I wrote, you have both the Sun and Saturn in their chariots because they are both exalted but not doing business, as they are both, of course, in the declining places, the 6th and the 12th. But these are also fortune pivots in her case, as you can see that fortune is in the goat horned one, the image which was activated in zodiacal releasing, and these the tetragonal positions with regards to the goat horn one are of course the ram and the scales, so these are fortune places. So perhaps we can say that these are chromatizo as well, these fortune places, because they are angles, they are pivots in relation to a lot of fortune. So that's an interesting one, I think. And perhaps we can upgrade the principles of these planets because they are in fortune angles. So they are both chromatizo. So it looks like your remark confirms this doctrine. Both the Sun and Saturn seem to protect you as a person in a sense, and harm your sister and daughters, signified by Venus, ruler of the 12th, burned by the Sun and opposed by Saturn. So yeah, this is a very interesting confirmation about the idea that this sort of harming or protection can be seen in a chart simply by the condition of a planet. So let's have a look further. So the interesting thing is that this is in a chart of a person who is not eminent, but this works as well in such a chart. So, okay. So my conclusion, and again confirmed by this example, is that this can be the case, the idea that images and planets might operate differently in eminent charts. It's also looked as if it worked in charts simply of persons not being eminent. So when that is the case in any possible chart, what is going on in the chart of someone who is eminent? So, and then I went a sort of haywire with all sorts of things trying to see whether or not eminence was indicated further or perhaps enhanced in some sort of way. So then I started looking at these levels, Ptolemy's rank of fame, the 6 levels of his social hierarchy, as taught by Robert Zola. But I discarded that one as well, simply because it's just simply addressing the Sun and the Moon, but I might be reconsidering this as I go on with my further examination of this topic. But at first I declined this because I was investigating it, and this is the chart of Hitler, as I showed in the previous video. And of course, the conditions of a godlike person, a godlike status as Hitler had for some time, does not apply to his chart at all. So that fell through, I think, as a good idea of doing that. And what I did also was all the issues that I addressed in previous videos, the special lots that Valens uses for eminence, the spear-bearing planets, etc. Well, I threw them in a heap and tried to confirm it with this consideration further perhaps, but that was just simply too much. So I investigated 3 example charts to test my hypothesis, and it fell through simply because I did the chart of my dad, and looking at his charts and using all these factors, he should have been an eminent person as well, and he wasn't. So that fell through, so there needs to be something else investigated. So what to do next? So what now? Because my investigation ran aground, because simply using all these techniques, everybody is eminent, so that is no place to go to try to differentiate between charts. So I was a bit at a loss of what to do next. So then something interesting happened. And the interesting thing that happened was that I got help from a comment on one of these videos addressing the issue of eminence. A listener to them wrote to me, "Hi Martin, I've been looking at Valens's book 3, chapter 4 on the winds." And that was a very interesting one, simply because Valens quotes the exaltation degree with the planet's highest elevation, which he calls the north, and its fall, the depression, he associates with its lowest elevation, which he says is the south. And then he describes planets moving from the exaltation degree down to the depression and back up again as going up from the south or down from the north, coming up and going down, or going up to the north, coming down from the north, going up to from the south, going down to the south, etc. I will explain in a moment. And she said, well, looking at your 3 example charts, I saw that John Travolta has his sun moving up, as well as 2 of his triplicity rulers, Jupiter and Mercury. Princess Diana had the moon and Mars moving up. They are both triplicity rulers, while in my dad's chart neither light was moving up, although Jupiter, his second triplicity ruler, was. So, and as the lights represent, she said, Jane said, as the lights represent the highest status that can be reached, the fact that they are moving down may well diminish eminence. So wow, that was quite a revealing comment of somebody well known, well acquainted with the material having to do with Valens's texts. So I was quite pleased with that. So it sounded very promising. So thank you, Jane. And let me explain how the winds in a chart can be investigated and discovered. So let's have a look at that. So let's investigate the winds of the planets in your chart or in any chart. So here I'm using my own chart, and I have highlighted Helios, the sun, in my chart, and I will try to establish the wind that my Helios in Aries has. Here you see the way Valens explains it, so you can read it in your own leisure time. Let me illustrate how this is done. So what you do is you locate the exaltation by portion, by degree, which is of course the 20th portion of the RAM for Helios. And you mark these out as having sort of a quadrant structure in the chart. So you use the exaltation degree of, in this case, Helios, the sun, and you mark out this 20th degree by the squares it has to, the tetragonal relation it has to this degree, and of course the opposition with that degree is the depression of Helios. So then you get this sort of a quadrant system, but now based not on anything having to do with angles, but in this case associated with the degrees of exaltation of a planet. And then you get the exaltation point is called the north, and the south is called the depression. Some things going south, so to speak, in the American vocabulary. Okay, so things, this side of this quadrant sort of system is the place where things are going well. So when a planet moves from the location of its depression towards the location of its exaltation, then it's first in the first quadrant relative to that position, in this case moving up from the depression towards the exaltation, then you call that going up from the south. So the planet is moving away from its depression. And the best one, the exaltation in height, is from, in this case for Helios, the sun, it's from the goat horn one in the quadrant towards the ram, and that's called going up to the north. And the reason is that the planet is moving towards its exaltation. Now the other side of this, let's say, quadrant system is less so simply because a planet is moving away from its exaltation and moving towards the image where it will finally come to its depression, the fall of the planet. So being in this quadrant is called coming down from the north. The planet is moving away from its exaltation, and coming down to the south means that the planet is moving towards its depression. So you could say there are certain degrees of perhaps force in having to do with this issue. You can say that a planet is growing in height, in strength, exalted in height, by means of this, the location in a certain image, and relative to the exaltation portion that this planet has in a specific image of the chart. So when I put this in a table and refer it to all the images relative to Helios the Sun, then I get this, these four places where this Helios the Sun can be found. So what you need to do is you need to locate the image where Helios is found in a specific chart. In this case, my chart, it's in the second degree of the ram. So I try to find where I can see the image of the ram, and I can see that it's in this place. The sun is of course in the second degree of Aries, and it's moving up to the 20th degree of Aries, which is the exact location of the exaltation degree, and that means that my sun is going up to the north, which is a happy consideration for the sect light in my case, going up to the north. That's how you do it. So what I've done, I've tabulated this for you. In the next slide you can see all the quadrants for each and every traditional planet. So let's have a look at them. So here you have all the 7 traditional planets. Again, simply you just need to locate the planet in what image the planet is, and then you can see whether or not it's going up to the north, coming down from the north, coming down to the south, or going up from the south. So the first one is of course the best place for a planet to be, because then it will be exalted in height and indeed have something to do with the issue of eminence, probably. So and primarily this, I think this must be about the lights, because these two of course have a lot to do with eminence that can be reached in a certain life, in a certain chart. So let's look at some examples that I use. Of course, this chart of Desi Bautis is a very interesting one. I must emphasize that this is a birth certificate chart. So the time given for this chart is from a birth certificate, which is an AA status in a lot of ideas about the exactness of a birth time. Because I've also seen other charts of Bautis when giving him a Libra ascendant with the scales rising, which of course has a big influence on seeing certain eminence factors really good at work in this chart. But here this is a chart that I investigate, and of course I said that the reason that this is such an eminent chart, although the planets are really in a lousy condition, to use the expression, except also for Venus, because Venus is the only planet in a beneficial place, being in the 11th, and all the other planets are cadent, also both light. So that's a very challenging situation, and you would not expect eminence from such a person, I think, simply based on the idea that whenever planets are not in their chariots, as I said in the example and the definition given by Antiochus, well, then we can hardly expect a person to be eminent. But perhaps we can use this evaluation of testing the wind, trying to see what's going on here. So I'm going to do this for Helios in this case. So let's have a look at Helios, and what I'm going to do is imagining the quadrants that you get when you use the exaltation degree portion of Helios, which is the 20th portion of the ram. So this means that his Helios is exactly in the portion having to do with the depression of Helios, which again would suggest, well, this is not a good place for eminence. So let's check this out. Where can we find, we see that Helios is in the scales, so I'm looking for wherever I can find the scales. So that is in this short summation. And you can see that indeed the Sun is in the 19th portion, the 20th portion of the scales. So this means that the Sun is going up from the south. So he is actually starting his pathway to becoming more exalted. So this is what we need to say about this Helios of Mr. Bautis. He's coming up from the south, but please see that this is only a very the first step of the Sun rising up to the place of his exaltation, and he still has a long way to go to get there. So perhaps that's a consideration as well, but we need to establish that this is indeed a light, the sec light indeed, coming up from the south. So, okay, interesting. Okay, still the same chart with of Mr. Bautis. I'm now going to test the wind having to do with Kronos, Saturn. So what I'm doing again is locating the exaltation portion of this planet, which is also in the 21st degree in this case of the scales. So again, I'm looking in this tabulation, and I'm finding the image of the scales, the glyph of the scales, which is in this first place. So yeah, we can say that the Saturn Kronos, his Saturn Kronos, is going up to the north. So the interesting thing is that this is of course a planet close to the ruler of the ascendant, which is Mars, Aries, Mars. So that might be a factor having to do with his rise in status. Interesting. Okay, let's have a further look at this issue. Now the question remains, of course, how we need to use this and interpret this in this context having to do with eminence. Now this is what Valens says about it. For every nativity then it is necessary to recognize whether the sun or moon or horoscopus is Yefeta, and with that kind of wind, with what kind of wind it is running, and to observe the remaining stars in this manner, etc., etc. You can read it in on your own. He uses the winds in relation to the Yefeta, but that does not seem to coincide specifically with length of life investigations, as this seems to be somewhat of a different sort, right? I think I will be addressing this issue again in another video following this one, or perhaps later in this series. But the question is, it has to do with the mysterious thing called the Theta. But the interesting thing is that it suggests something having to do with eminence, as Jane, the one who inspired me to investigate all this, said, as the lights represents the highest status that can be reached. The fact that they are moving down may well diminish eminence, as was the case with my father's chart. And personally, I would add, of course, the triplicity rulers to this list, as well as the ruler of the ascendant and the ruler of the 10th whole sign place, and perhaps even the MC with that. So when we do this in the chart of Bautis, we get these results. So let's first investigate the sect lights, the sect light and the other light. We already saw that the sun is coming up from the south, which is also the case for Selene, the moon, because she is exalted in let me think, the moon is exalted in Taurus. There we have it. So yeah, she is coming up from the south, and she is moving in the direction of the place where she is exalted. So, and she has not yet reached the place where she would be going up from the north, which would be when she would be past the image of the water pourer. So, okay, so these are the two lights. They are moving up in rank, so to speak. So that is quite a good signification for these two things. When we look at the domicile lord of the ascendant, which is Mars, then we see that it's coming down from the south, because, of course, Saturn is in its depression where she is located now, because Mars is exalted in the goat horn one and is in its depression in the crab. So the degree of the crab is the exaltation portion of Mars is a bit before this. So he's just coming out of the portion where he is depressed. So yeah, he's coming up from the south, now going down. I need to address the issue of Aries Mars again, because I was mistaken in the portion that I suggested or thought was the depression portion of Aries Mars, which was not correct. So the domicile lord of the ascendant is, of course, Mars, and the degree of the depression of Mars is the 29th portion of the crab. So that means that this Mars is coming down towards the south, because it has still yet to reach the portion where he will be depressed. So yeah, this is not a good location for Mars with regards to the idea of reaching heights. So that's not right. Okay, the domicile lord of the 10th place, which is of course the self-same Helios, the sun, and we already established that that was the planet which is coming up from the south, because it's just moving away from the portion where he is in its depression. Okay, and the fourth factor that we want to investigate are the triplicity rulers, which is the first one is Kronos Saturn, the second one is Hermes Mercurius, and the third one is Zeus Jupiter. So when we look at these winds of these factors, then we get this, that the Saturn, the first triplicity ruler, is really coming up to the north, simply because the exaltation portion of Kronos Saturn is in Libra, the scales, and he is moving towards that, and it's also just past the portion where he is actually exalted, which was the 21st portion, the 22nd portion of the scale. So he's moving towards that, so he's coming up from the north. So that is pretty good for the first triplicity ruler. So that might be an indication of him becoming eminent so soon in life, because he was relatively young when he gained power and came the power in Suriname and took over by a coup, which of course Saturn then assisted by Mars, Valens. That's an interesting one. So yeah, that's so when we evaluate what I've just done, trying to find the factors having to do with possible eminence and trying to find whether or not the indicators of these places have, well, are rising in the strength having to do with eminence because they are moving up towards their exaltation, or rather declining from that. Then we get this. The sun is going up from the south, which is good, relatively good, because it's just beginning. It's not such a strong phase, I think, in this climbing towards hierarchy, towards a higher form of hierarchy. The moon is going up from the south as well. She is going to move towards her exaltation in the bull, and she's further in her trajectory, so to speak, from going from the degree where the portion where she is in her depression, moving towards the portion where she will be exalted, and she's further in that trajectory compared to the Helios, the sun, because the sun is just beginning in that trajectory. When we look at the domicile lord of the ascendant, which is Mars, he is coming down from the south. So yeah, that's not a good indication for a climb in hierarchy or a climb in eminence. But the domicile lord of the 10th place, which is also the place where the MC is, that is going up from the south, because that is the sun as well, Helios. And the first triplicity ruler is going up to the north, and he's exalted in height. And here we need to see that these planets are all in fortune angles, which is, I think, a very big boost for these planets as well. So, but this is a very interesting factor having to do with eminence, possible eminence, simply because they have to do with exaltation, and eminence is, of course, being exalted above the general crowd and standing out from the crowd. So it's a very interesting factor to evaluate in this context. Now, since we are trying to evaluate whether or not this has any significance in this context, let's have a look at this other person who was very elevated in his days and gained quite a height in exaltation and eminence. So that's interesting, because this is the chart of Herr Hitler, and let's have a look at his sun, of course, because that is the sec light being above the horizon, so that is the light we need to check. So we need to find first the image where it's located, which is in the bull, and then I found in this little table, I'm trying to find where we find the bull, and then we see that it's the second portion, so it's coming down from the north, which is logical because the sun is exalted in Aries and the sun is just moved out of this image. So yeah, this is coming down from the north. I'm not quite sure how to interpret that, because you could say that such a planet then is at the height of its eminence, and it has just left this place, this specific place having to do with the portion. But when you consider the quadrant where this planet is in, as I did with the chart of Bautis, his Helios is, of course, in the portion where it's in its depression, and is just coming out of that. So you could say that his move towards a higher hierarchy is just started. And in the case of Hitler, his sun is, his Helios is at the first stage of coming down from the north. So you could say that this is relatively strong. So I find that interesting. There is no literature on this interpretation of this trajectory, but I think that might be a factor having a certain significance in this evaluation, because it's a satellite after all. So yeah. Okay, let's have a look at the, so this is coming down from the north, but again, or going down from the north, but again, I think that is a relatively good position because it's just happened. for this Helios. Looking at Selene, the moon, we again find the image where she's in, and she's in the image of the goat-horned one, so I find that one, and I find that it's there. It's up until the 3rd degree of the next image, the water pore, so the moon is going up from the south, as you can see, because she has just left the image. Well, there's an image in between, but her image of depression is of course the scorpion, and she has moved away from that, so she is coming up from the south. So and she's of course with Jupiter, which is pretty good. When we look at the triplicity rulers of Herr Hitler, then we see that it's Venus the first one, Selene is the second one, and Mars, Aries Mars, is the third one. And when we look at the winds of these planets, then you can see that Venus is coming down from the north, the Selene is of course coming up from the south, and the third triplicity ruler, Aries, is coming down from the south. So, and then I've also addressed the other ones, as you can see, because we can see that Mercury is the strongest planet, being almost exactly on an angle, and he is coming up from the south as well, because he has just left the image where he is in his depression, which is Pisces. So again, you see sort of a stage from where he is in this particular principle. And when we look at Saturn, the planet being in with the MC portion, which is in the Lion, then you can see that Saturn is coming up from the north, coming up to the north, because he's on his way to the scales where he's in exaltation. So this is how Herr Hitler's planets are having their winds with them or either against them in this sense. So yeah, my problem with this is always, I mean the example of Herr Hitler is not such a very specific example of yeah, you see the eminence factor quite healthy at work here, and so you can really see quite well an example of how this eminence shows a person who is eminent. So that's quite interesting actually, because the reason we need to also address the issue of, okay, is there a planet angular perhaps, or has this something to do with strength? And the strength considerations I will be addressing in the next video, having to do with certain areas of a chart where that are considered to be stronger than others. And that's also an interesting issue to address, having to do with, of course, strength and the possibility of a planet to be at work for a certain issue of life, for instance, being at work for eminence, as it is in this case. So yeah, I will address that later. So this is Herr Hitler's chart. And as a example of good practice, I will again try all this with the anonymous chart. So yeah, here we have one. So let's have a look. When we look at the sun and the moon, the possible lights and the sect lights, then we see that the sun is coming down from the south. Again, the sun is moving towards the place where he will be depressed. So he's coming down from to the south. That's the right expression. And the moon, of course, is moving towards her place of exaltation, so she's coming up from the north. So the moon is actually in with regards to this consideration, is growing stronger, but she is placed in the 6th place of this chart. So again, the question is, will it be able to manifest itself? When we look at the domicile lord of the ascendant, which in this case is Aries, then we see that Aries is coming up from the south, because as we just saw in the other chart of Bautis, the 29th portion of the crab is the place where Aries Mars is depressed. So he is just coming up from the south. It's not really quite strong, but it's moving up, but slowly and in its first step. So the question is whether or not this is really helping Mars being positive or not. So that's the reason why I gave it this color. So it's questionable, and you really have to try to understand in what phase a planet is with regards to coming out of the place where it's depressed or moving towards a place where it will be exalted. So for Mars this is not that strong, but we need to say that it's coming up from the south. The domicile lord of the 10th place in this case is also the Sun, and it might also be Mercury, because Mercury is the domicile master of the MC by portion. So that is an interesting factor to take into consideration. It might have to do with eminence as well. So when we look at that, we can see that Mercury, Hermes Mercury is moving up from to the north, because it will be exalted in the Virgin. So that is a relatively good indication for the strength, the height gained by this planet. That's interesting. You must not say the strength of this planet, but the height that this planet can attain. That's I think the better formulation for what you are seeing with this factor. And that's always important. When you don't know what you're seeing, you cannot delineate it. So in this case it has to do with growing, a factor having to do with eminence. So yeah. Okay, the triplicity rule in this chart, because the Sun is in a water-like image. The first one is Venus, the second one is Mars, Aries, and the third one is the Moon again. And of course the third one needs to be a power helping the first two triplicity rulers. And you can see that for Mars, of course, we know that it's coming up from the south. When you look at Venus, the first one is going down from the south, because she is moving towards her depression, being in the Virgin. And we see the Moon, as we have seen already, she's moving up towards a place where she will be exalted. So yeah. But this is not an eminent person. So what is the reason? Has it something to do with the sect light coming down? Both lights are cadent, which is also a difficult position for the lights. It's not that strong. But the second triplicity ruler, being Mars, is in the 10th place, which is pretty good. And he's also the ruler of the ascendant, the domicile master. He's coming up from the south, although still weak, but okay. And it's supported by a conjunction with Jupiter. So that might be interesting. So the question is, why is he not eminent? Why is this not an eminent person? Is it because of the lights being cadent and the Sun coming down, the sect light coming down from the south? Or towards the south it is, yes. Is it because of Mars and the triplicity rulers not being of the sect in favor, which is something I have not yet addressed, but it has to do with whether or not these planets are able to support this this notion of eminence without qualification, because whenever a planet is not of the sect in favor, it will hinder or might cause problems in a certain way. It will not be as smooth as it is when the triplicity rulers are of the sect in favor. So that might be an indication as well. And then we have, of course, Saturn being in the first place with the rising degree, with the horoscopos, and he is coming down. And Jupiter is coming down as well. So when we put that in, then we have this. Jupiter is, let me see, yeah, she is coming down from the north. Jupiter is, because he's exalted in the crab, of course, and Saturn is coming down from the north, also because he is in his depression, in his exaltation in the scale. So yeah, this might be all the reason why this person is not eminent at all. Nobody knows about him. It's a he. So okay, here we are with our investigation of these factors. So that's all, folks, for now. Of course, I will be back because, as you can gather, this is not the final word on the issue of eminence, not in the least. So I will be getting back on this issue as well, and that might result in a re-evaluation of some factors in the chart which have become quite well known, but there are also some things that are relatively unknown. So I will be getting back to these in the next installments of these videos having to do with eminence, which will then present perhaps even a complete re-evaluation of some factors in a chart having to do with what planets can mean in a certain chart, and in this case having to do with eminence. So I hope to see you again next time, and enjoy this one and study this, because the idea of the winds is very interesting and it's relatively unknown. I have never heard anybody talk about it, so enjoy it, and I hope to hear from you. And in the comments, please give all your comments on this video, and when you try it out, please give the examples and show me how you did it and how you can see that this is a chart of an eminent person or perhaps not. So thanks again, and I'll see you next time.